Okay, first I want to talk about the midterm next week. If you haven't filled out a doodle poll time for yourself, go choose one. Choose one that nobody else has chosen. Let's see what the status of that is. Gotta find the window.
I'm still figuring out my schedule for next week, which is the reason I haven't chosen mine yet.
Okay.
So I haven't figured out the best time for that. I will probably by tomorrow.
Okay. All right. So far, nobody's overlapping time, so that's good. I'm not sure if I somehow disabled that or whatever, but good.
Did we get a confirmation from when we sign up? Because I don't think I got one.
I don't know. I see you there though.
Because I don't have it marked on my calendar yet.
Friday at 5.
Okay. For mine?
Mm-hmm. All right. So if you're in the other class, you've heard some of this. So the style, like I've said, is going to be interview style. You're going to have to share your screen and your audio. I don't need to see video. I want to see you typing and clicking, and I want you to explain what you're doing as you do it. That's what often people ask you to do in interviews too, because they don't want to watch you at a whiteboard just sitting there thinking, 10 minutes pass, and then you just start writing the answer. They want to know how you think about the problem. What are the things you're considering of doing? Why do you not do them? What's pros and cons of those things, and so forth. So I want to hear you talk through what you're doing. And it's actually kind of difficult to do that, by the way. It's a skill you can sort of acquire. I think it's easily acquired. You just have to do it a few times. But it's good practice to do that. So I'll give you a task based on, I'll talk about the topics in a second, but I'll give you a task that has 3 parts to it. And that way you can kind of do one part and get partial credit and not, fail the whole thing because you didn't finish the whole thing. And of course, the task will be involving the technologies that we've learned in this class. I don't know what the task is yet. It'll be slightly different for different people. But so in the 3 parts, if you get one of those parts done, whichever is the easiest for you, that would be 40% of the grade that you got that part done. The next part would be another 20%. And the third final part would be another 20%. So that's 80% for just completing something. The remaining 20% is based on how well you do it. Like if you, in our situation, I don't know exactly what it would look like to do a really poor job of like setting up EC2, for example. I guess you could just take forever, but I don't know if I'll grade that, take out points for that. But maybe, so suppose you have to do a firewall where you allow port 443. But if you just say, well, I know it's easier to just say all ports are allowed. That's a worse solution. I can't really tell you how many points I would take off for that specifically, but it's a worse solution because you've opened up the firewall to the whole world, and that's not really necessary. So not ideal, right? Do the best approach for whatever it is you're being asked to do. Or in Python Flask, if you have to write some Flask code, a little web app or something, you could obviously write really poor code. Not using the right algorithms, not using the right data structures or whatever. And you can write very poor Ansible code. So again, I can't really say what that looks like. It's somewhat subjective, I guess, but that's just, that's the way the world works. Like we can't always explain in detail what the best result would look like. I guess we kind of have to see it before we can judge it. So that's that remaining 20%. Also, part of that is how much guidance you need. So you can talk to me while we're doing this and ask for clarifications or whatever. But if I have to guide you through a lot of the solution, then that's going to reflect on that 20%. That's going to be a, not a good thing. You can look at notes that, anything we've done in the class, not videos from the class, because that would be kind of weird. But if you've taken notes from things we've done, you can, of course, look at AWS documentation or Flask documentation or whatever, like official docs. Those are totally valid. I have tried to show those a lot because that's where you want to be comfortable. If you Stack Overflow search, for every single thing, if that's like your only source of knowledge, it's going to look bad in the interview for one thing, or even in an actual job. And also you're going to get a lot of poor advice, because on Stack Overflow, there's a lot of at least old advice, things that used to be the best solution, but now we don't do that anymore, for example. Or you might find Python 2 code that doesn't work in Python 3. So you're sitting there trying to figure out what you got to do to fix it. And you don't want to be looking at Stack Overflow for every little issue because you have no idea what you're doing. Now, in practice, people do use Stack Overflow a lot. You've seen me use it a lot, but there's a kind of efficiency about it. If you do have a sense of what you're doing, you can quickly identify that's a poor Stack Overflow answer or whatever. So if you're fast at it, that's fine in a job, but you don't want to be doing that in an interview kind of situation. You want to kind of know what you're doing and know where to look in the official documentation. So that's fine. You can look at code you've produced for this class also. So before I talk about the topics, any questions on the approach? Okay. The topics we've covered are Flask, which is making GET post request in Python. We have a lot of other stuff that's gone on in this class, so I'm not going to give you a task that is large enough to force you to spend your whole time in Flask. That's not really a cloud computing kind of question, right? But it may be in there somewhere. So be familiar with what we've done with Flask, or at least be able to pull up an example and know exactly what's going on so that you could quickly use it. So then in AWS, we've done a lot of things. EC2, obviously, can you launch instances based on whatever I ask? Or can you think of what a good configuration would be for whatever task? Can you set up the firewall correctly? Can you set up permissions correctly? Can you connect to them? After you launch an instance, can you launch multiple instances? And so on. Then we have Dynamo. Can you create tables? Can you add items to the table with the interface, the web interface? Can you use secondary key or sort keys? I don't think I'd ask you to actually make a global secondary index, but maybe know what it is, know what it would be good for. Can you access DynamoDB using Python? Actually, something I forgot. Can you use the AWS command line? Let me put that in here. So just, do you know where to find, do you know where to look for documentation for the command line for AWS? Do you know how to quickly identify which commands exist and how to run them? Can you configure the command line for yourself? So can you look at EC2 instances in the command line? Can you look at DynamoDB data from the command line? Can you use EC2 to talk to Dynamo, which would require an IAM policy to allow that? So you got to know how to use IAM policies, IAM roles to make sure the right things can talk to each other.
Quick question.
Yep.
Do we have to like confirm that they talk to each other, or will you just know like that they'd be able to by watching us set it up?
Well, it depends, but I'm going to try to give you a task that are actual practical things, like make this behavior work. And so that may require that you set up a policy that works correctly, you know. So
Yeah, but are we gonna have to like write some amount of code to like actually input something into the DynamoDB table that's running on the EC2 instance?
yeah, probably, because what I don't want to do is just talk through a regular midterm exam, as in like, here are 25 questions one by one. That's not what this is about. This is more about, can you solve a problem that won't take a long time to solve if you know what you're doing? And there will be these parts that, you know, so you can get partial credit, but it's about making something work correctly, and whatever has to be done to make that happen. If you have to make a policy because you do need these two things to talk to each other, then that's just something you have to do along the way. I won't ask specifically like, okay, now make a policy. Okay, great. Now let's do this other thing. Okay, great. So it'll add up to something that has to work. I don't want you to have to type in a bunch of data to prove it works, you know, so it'll be less on the like tedious typing to make, like, you're not going to have to make a whole notes app with all the functionality, because that would just take too long. People type at different rates. But I'm not going to ask just a series of like unit test kind of questions. You know, they won't be isolated questions. So actually, as far as like testing is concerned, there's unit tests and there's integration tests. There's other kinds too, but unit test is like, this function, the square root function, finds the square root correctly for all these different inputs. That would be like a regular midterm test where there's 25 questions. Then there's integration tests where you're going to test the square root function along the way, because what you're really testing is that you're finding I don't know, the variance or something of a data set. So that involves loading the data set. It involves maybe, you know, filtering some data out of the data set. It involves actually running the variance function, which involves the square root function. And you're checking that the output of the variance is correct. So there's lots of things being tested all together, and also that they work together. In a more realistic situation, integration tests would be like, the website actually shows the data from the database, which means the website has to work, the firewall has to be correct, the database has to have the data, have the right permissions. All the things have to work for the integration test to work. So both kinds of tests are useful, but we're more on the integration test side, if that, you know, by analogy. So the other topics would be Lambda. It would be a minimal lambda function if you're asked to do that, because we didn't spend a lot of time in how to write complex lambda functions. But, you know, if your lambda function has to talk to Dynamo, for example, that's a permission thing too that you'd have to figure out. And then Ansible, we've also covered. So can you set some things up in Ansible? Now, no one would get all these questions or all these components in their task. It would take way too long. But you should know about them. They're all things we've done. They're all based on the homeworks. I looked at the list of homeworks and said, okay, whatever I've asked you to do in a homework, I could ask you on the midterm, but I just can't ask you all the things. So, questions? A second, let me mark this here. So last time, let me share. Oh, there's a chat. You mean for each person, Carrie? Okay, yeah, let me make a note. Or are you actually just asking for your own time? Because I might just do that individually. Email reminders or something.
Yeah, it was asking for me, but I guessed it benefited everyone else, so that's why I just suggested that.
Yeah, I'm just not sure about if I want everyone to see everyone's time. I'm not sure why I don't, but it just seems like it's everybody's own thing. So I'll remind each person.
So during those days that fall on, do any of them fall during class times? Our class times?
Yeah, so we won't have regular class.
Okay.
Already the Wednesday, I think, is a day off. But otherwise, to allow people to choose those times, if that's the only time they can really do, we'll just not have these meetings.
Okay.
So you'd only have one responsibility that week, which is whatever your time your time is. So we were here, obviously. And I wanted to finish showing you how to make your app have authentication. We were at the stage of, we had a Cognito user pool. So as a reminder, Cognito is a service to keep track of users and provides ability to log in. You can add a connection to something you already have, like Active Domain or something, Active Directory, or other services that provide authentication. But you could also just put all your users in Cognito. So that's what I did. I made a user pool and called it bubbly users, and set up all the requirements for a user. There's one person, and you can add people here. And you can write other functions, Lambda functions or whatever, and then a user interface for your own app to add users through your app or whatever. But what I've said is that people cannot, only administrators can create people. So users cannot simply sign up without me doing it. We then did app integration because we need to connect this with the site, the JavaScript code. And it has support for that. But what I didn't do correctly, I just scrolled past it too fast, was it here? Yeah, so I think because I've already done it. Or no, sorry, I was in the wrong place. App clients. So I've got this one client, which is fine. But suppose I add another. What I missed was this checkbox. I don't want a client secret. Amplify, the JavaScript framework, doesn't use that. So by not checking that, I don't have a secret. We have it here, client ID. This user pool ID is actually from up here. I think there's another place you can get it, but that's the user pool that we're talking about. And of course, the region likes to know that. So with that, you then say configure with this configuration. Then the other cool thing you can do, like I said before, is put this with authenticator around it. So then when you hit the app, what am I on? Yep. You would hit this if you're, fresh or whatever. So I'd already done this between our meetings, but I had an initial password and it took me to a second screen that made me change the password. So now I have this different password. So all this functionality was from with Authenticator and the UI React library. So I didn't change any bubbly code really to make that interface. So that's pretty convenient. So now people are logged in and the sign out link comes from Amplify sign out right here. That's a React component that is defined from the UI React library. I guess it's pretty ugly, but you can style it, and I just made it take the whole space because I didn't put it in a box or anything. So that's what it looks like, and it works. So that's nice. Now I'm curious, like I said before, this UI is not really responsive to what I've actually configured in Cognito. So it does have an interface for creating accounts. Oh, by the way, actually, if you ever do fake emails or fake website names, it should always be example.com, because there could be a user called dummyaccount@gmail. So example.com is supposed to be for examples. You click more info, it says, I thought they had a thing that talked about the email. Well, anyway, at least it used to be the case. They can also support example emails. They just, it doesn't go to anybody, but it's designed so that it's safe to send fake emails to this address or users to this fake domain because it's set up for that purpose. Whereas any other thing you can randomly think of might be real, you might be bugging somebody. So there, I guess you should do 555. Yep, so you get this silly error, signups not permitted for this user pool, which doesn't make any sense to users who are trying to sign up. So you would have to, what I've actually had to do is go to the source code for the UI React and kind of duplicate some of the things they did, because there isn't really a good subclassing story for the kind of React that we're using in this example. So you can't really just modify parts of it. You kind of have to re-implement the elements that you want. So you would re-implement, first of all, you not even show this page, but also if there's a different kind of error, like if you type this wrong, I guess that looks okay, but there's other errors that I've seen that are just weird. So you may want to rebuild those. I wonder if the reset works. I'm not sure I want to do that, but presumably it sends to my email, which would be cool because I didn't have to build any of that. So as long as you are okay with that design for the interface, I think you can change the colors, but that might be it. You can have authentication for your React app. And there's also plugins for like Amplify interfaces for native, if you use native React. And these other platforms also. So it doesn't have to be React. And you can plug into Cognito and other platforms like Dynamo and stuff that Amplify supports. So now what you'd like is to not let anybody access your Lambda functions unless they've been logged into your app, which is a front end thing. But the front end is calling the Lambda function. The browser is running the JavaScript, which asks the Lambda function for DynamoDB data or to create notes or whatever. So you want that to be protected too, because otherwise what's the point of a login? So that happens not on Lambda side. On Lambda side, it doesn't even have an access to the outside world. It can only be called by other things like API gateway or directly command line or another Lambda function, I guess, or EC2 or something like that. But we want serverless. So we're not going to have EC2 or command line. We're going to have API gateway. That's the way to expose Lambda to the outside world. So we went over this in the sense of making an HTTP front end for your Lambda functions. Again, to do that, suppose you've made a Lambda function. You'd go to API gateway. And what we had done was create API. And we did HTTP API. And there's actually some differences between these options. The one that I want to show, so that's fine, but to use HTTP API with authentication, you have to make an IAM role. And I want to use my Cognito list of users directly. So I actually want the REST API, because that actually, it doesn't say here, but that's going to provide the option to use Cognito for the authentication. So let's do that. I've only got one Lambda function. It only provides the list of nodes. I didn't set the create and all that, but let's call it bubbly API 2 because I've already got one called API. And I'm going to say new. Swagger, by the way, is a way of defining APIs where it makes a page that shows all the API actions and you can test them right there on the page. So it's pretty neat. Let me show you what that looks like. It's like live documentation. I don't know if there's a quick example. I should have a screenshot. So something like that. It says, here's get, here's post. These are the things you got to provide. Doesn't help. Anyway, it's hard to see, but you can put sample data and then run the thing and you'll see the result. So if you're building APIs, consider here, put your data, see results. So then you can make an API gateway configuration from a Swagger definition. Okay, now this interface is different from what we saw before. If we make an HTTP gateway, I'll show you. So that was the REST gateway. HTTP one looks like this. Here's your routes and everything. This new gateway looks like this. So what you do in this approach, you don't have to do this for the assignment. You can do the HTTP one or this one. You would say you want resources. So here's a root resource, but there's no methods, no get, no post, no nothing. So let's make a actually new resource first for getting notes. It says, okay, this is what it's going to be called, /getAllNotes. I don't want it to be proxy. Proxy, it's convenient if you have a lot of things you want to support, different destinations. It's kind of like a star, but I want to do that. I do want to enable cores. So remember, cores is what stops the browser from even accessing the resource. So you got to make sure the resource says, this is allowed. You can access me from anywhere in the world. So this has to be turned on if you're going this approach. That's a resource. There's still no methods except the cores one, which is in options. You now have to add, in this case, I think everything was post. Or no, this one's get. So the get. That's a method called get. That's associated with getAllNotes. So I don't have to define the path again. It's the get option for getAllNotes. And what happens then? Well, we do want a Lambda function, but you do have other options, other services. You can define what the response is in this interface, a mock response, or you can connect to another endpoint. So we want Lambda, and then we have to say what the function is called, get all nodes. We don't want the proxy one. Actually, I would need to check that. The version get all nodes doesn't even use the Lambda data in the event. So I'm not sure if that should be on or off for the way we defined our Lambda function, but okay, so it's going to have to give permission to the gateway to execute the function, because remember, Lambda functions, like everything else in Amazon, default permissions don't let anything, any code, any person do anything. So to execute the function, there has to be a permission associated with that. And so by saving this, it's going to say, I'm going to give this API gateway the permission to execute this function. All right. It's kind of interesting how it shows this. You can test it here, but it says the request is going to come in, get request to get all nodes resource. It's going to send it off to Lambda. Lambda function will do its job. It'll produce a response, which will then come out the other side. You can do things that redefine what the response looks like. You can give all different kinds of codes for the different situations that come up. We don't need to do any of that, but that's all available. If you click method execution, you'll see authorization none. And again, you can set up a role, but I don't want to do that. I want to use Cognito. You can require an API key, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to put the key in the JavaScript code because that would be easily seen by anybody. I want their login to be the only way to get to this function. And I don't need any special settings here. So I got to make an authorizer. You say create new authorizer, like for Cognito, or you can have a Lambda function that does whatever it does and says, you know, who's authorized. So I'm going to make an authorizer called lovely and I want to connect to the Cognito pool. So these are the users that want to use this API. And I'm surprised that it makes me type this here, but you know, because it's pretty much always going to be this. How's it going to authenticate? Well, I want it to look at the header called authorization, the HTTP header. So when I send the request, I got to throw a header on there called authorization. That's where it should look for that data, for who is this trying to access this function. All right, then you would go back to resources and configure that. But notice it's not appearing. So this is I think an oversight in the interface. You actually have to refresh the page. If you make the things in the order I made it, go back and try it again, and now it knows about it. So, you know, that could take somebody a long time to realize what happened. It was just out of date. Now you say, yes, you have to be approved by this to be able to use the function. Then the rest, I'll have to make a stage when I save it, but the rest is all good. So then I would deploy it. Back over here, deploy, because nothing's actually been saved. And this is where I make a stage. We'll call it production. All right, so here's my address. So you'll see now, and you can turn on caching here, by the way. But you got to be careful with caching, because like if your nodes change, the cache could give old data. So watch if we try to access this get all nodes. It says missing authentication token. So that's good. You cannot simply access it. You have to be logged in. You have to have a so-called token. So the way you make the token is back on the JavaScript side. you got to use the auth library from Amplify, and either here or you can put it below so you don't have to do this every time. But you have to say, what's the current session? What are the user's details? So then once you receive the session information, and of course that would fail if they're not logged in, you make a token, JWT token. So JWT will encrypt and include your user info, but you can't simply change the user info to be somebody else inside your browser because it won't encrypt correctly. And that gets stuck into the header. You have to use the word bearer. If that all is set up, and I'm printing the JWT so you can see it, then the request will succeed. Chat. All right, see you, Sam. This is it functioning. Actually, it's already functioned because you see it here. You see the notes. So if you watch it happen, first of all, I did the console log. Here's the token. And get notes was executed here. Or no. Wait, is it still running the old version? Let's see. So get notes. Oh, I forgot to actually, it sent the token, but I didn't actually put the Lambda address or the API address. Let's do this address. So this will be the real test actually. Now it's actually running the API gateway. What's going on? Oh, so the cores is not set up. So let's go check the cores. So we had resources, options, and when you expand, so when the code 200, which is success, when that comes back, these are the things that we want to be set. So we need to now define what those will be. These all look like they're the right values. So let's see what it said. Cores error, response. Didn't have the headers. It's response. So here we are testing it. We can give data, which we don't need for this case, but response headers are all good. It all nodes. It was option, or it ran get. Here's the options. Sorry. These look fine. Allow origin. So what was the message? No access control allow origin is present. Oh, so it's not just the options request. That looked good. That's what we set up with cores here. We also need to do the get itself. Browsers are really strict these days. So cores says not only do you have to have an options resource that says this is allowed, so it runs that first. And if that doesn't come back good, it's never going to send the GET request, because once you send the GET request or post request, you're sending your data. So that could be dangerous itself. So it does the options check first, and our options are coming back fine. All these headers look good in the response. Then it runs the actual GET because it was happy with the options, but the GET itself didn't have those same headers. So it's still not going to trust the result that comes back from GET. The response is just ditched because no headers said that you can access this from a random location. So we have to do these same headers in the get also. It's kind of annoying, but go to the get response, define what the 200 response is supposed to look like. It's add our headers. What else do we need? Copy these headers. Methods. I guess we have to, I don't know if we need all those. Let's try one at a time. I know we need this one. Allow origin. And then we have to define the value for that header. Map the header value to be star. Assume that got saved. Then you deploy again in that stage. Now it should be live. We'll try this again. Still out of CORS error. Don't see the header coming through. Header mappings. It didn't get saved. Oh, I forgot the checkbox. This button. Allow origin to quote. Quote. Okay. Then we'll deploy again. And try it again. Still didn't give. Header did not appear. See if we have to add the other ones. Allow access control headers and allow methods. This should be these. I gotta quote it. And these. What happened? So this was that's the options. Here's the get. That finally came through. I'm not sure. I didn't need the others, but maybe it's just a delay in refreshing. Yeah, so we have to go check the Lambda code, but the authentication is now behaving. So let's just check the Lambda code real fast. I didn't actually update it for this new approach using the REST. So let's see what we have to do for REST. So this works okay for the HTTP API gateway, but not the REST gateway. And let's print what the event looks like when we call it this way. So as you know, CloudWatch is where you're going to catch the logs for Lambda functions. You go to your group, log groups, you find your function. And that should be this one that just ran. So that's empty. That's because this is way out of, this is not even appropriate for the Git notes, but that's okay. That's something that you're going to do. Taking the DynamoDB code from the prior assignment and putting it in a Lambda function. So anyway, you don't have to do the authentication, but I wanted to finish the demonstration of if you wanted your app to be actually authenticated. And of course, so what you would do then, if you want to know, you have to look at the docs, or we could talk about it at a later time, but here you can figure out what, if you send, there's a complicated way to get the user information in the Lambda function. I have to remind myself how that's done, but you can figure out what authentication was used to call the function, and so which user that was, and you can put that user's name in the Dynamo table. So then you could separate the notes per user. So then you can actually have a multiple user notes application that was secure. Or you can just have it for yourself and not keep track of who wrote the note, which is what I showed here. So that's two ways to make API gateways. It was complicated. There are a lot of steps, especially annoying is the cores thing. You have to set it up not just on options, but you have to set it up on all your resources, also the gets and the posts and so forth, at least the access allow origin. So I don't know if there's a more efficient way to do that with these tools, but that's the way I know how to do it. So it can be done. Questions about that? All right. So again, don't worry, you don't have to do the whole authentication thing at all for your assignment. Just make it work through the gateway, which we covered on the prior meeting. And otherwise, I'll see you on Friday. Not sure exactly yet what we'll do, but we'll try to find something that extends this application, or just talk about the midterm if you want. And then all of next week is the midterm. We don't have regular class meetings. All right. See you, everyone.